The restaurant was one of the most elegant places in the city. Its chandeliers sparkled like little stars, and the polished tables reflected soft lights. Guests often came dressed in their finest clothes, speaking softly as if raising their voices might disturb something precious. Every detail was perfect. The silver cutlery, the delicate glasses, even the tiny folded napkins had their place. To anyone walking in, it was a world apart from the noise and rush of the streets outside. Among all this elegance, there worked a young waitress. She was quiet and simple, moving through the restaurant almost like a shadow. No one paid much attention to her. She didn't complain when the guests asked for extra things or when her coworkers whispered behind her back. She just did her work carefully, folding napkins, pouring water, carrying trays of food. She always smiled politely. But it was a soft, almost invisible smile, one that didn't demand attention. She had been working there for a little over a year, and in all that time she had learned the rhythm of the restaurant. She knew which guests liked more water, which tables preferred wine, and which servers would accidentally bump into her if she wasn't careful. She knew every corner of the place, every sound, and every little habit of the staff and the guests. Yet, despite her knowledge and hard work, many of the other employees barely noticed her. Some even joked that she was too quiet or too simple to matter in a place like this. At the back corner of the restaurant, near the window that looked out on the quiet street, there was a grand piano. It was beautiful, made of polished black wood, and its keys glimmered under the lights. Sometimes it was used during special events when a professional musician was hired. Most days, however, it sat there, silent, like it was waiting for something important to happen. The young waitress often found herself walking past the piano. She never touched it in front of anyone. She just passed by, glancing at the keys as if remembering something private. No one knew why she did this. The other staff assumed it was just curiosity, or maybe that she liked the sound of music. But the truth was much deeper. She had a secret, one that she had never shared. She could play the piano like few others could. Her talent was something she had been learning in silence for many years. She didn't have lessons from famous teachers or a fancy background. Instead, she had learned on a second-hand piano at home, practicing whenever she could. At first, her fingers stumbled over the keys, producing awkward sounds that didn't make sense. But she kept going, day after day, hour after hour, driven by a love for the music she felt inside. Over time, she learned to make the piano sing, to tell stories with it, to make the notes carry emotions that words could never fully capture. Even now, in the busy, sparkling restaurant, she sometimes imagined sitting at the piano and playing. She thought about melodies that danced like sunlight on water or notes that fell gently like rain. But she never played in front of anyone. She was too shy, too careful, and she knew the other staff would never understand. They would laugh, or worse, they might make fun of her. So she kept her talent hidden, tucked away like a secret treasure. Most of the restaurant staff didn't notice much about her, but there was one person who did, the older chef. He had been at the restaurant for decades and had seen many young people come and go. He noticed the way she moved, the way she watched everything carefully, the small moments when her eyes seemed to light up at something beautiful. Once, he had seen her glance at the piano with a soft smile that held a kind of longing. The chef didn't say anything, but he quietly respected her. He sensed that there was something special about her, something the others could not see on a regular day. The young waitress would move between tables, pouring water and taking orders, always polite, always careful. She would smile at a child who spilled juice on the floor and nod reassuringly at the nervous guest who couldn't decide between the steak and the fish. She had learned to read people's moods and adjust herself quietly. It was a skill she had developed over time, one that made her good at her job, even if it didn't make anyone notice her extraordinary potential. Her coworkers often whispered behind her back. Some of them called her too plain or invisible. Others joked that she was a dreamer, someone who spent her time thinking about things that didn't matter, like the music she never played. She heard these words sometimes, but they didn't hurt her as much as they might have hurt someone else. She had learned to accept that people would always underestimate her. She kept her head down and her secret close, Despite all this, she found small moments of joy in her work. Sometimes a guest would compliment her service, and her heart would swell quietly. Sometimes she would glance at the piano during a slow moment and imagine herself playing, letting the music flow from her fingers even if no one heard it. Those were the moments she lived for. Moments that made the long hours and quiet days worthwhile. One rainy afternoon, the restaurant was less crowded than usual. The gentle sound of raindrops against the windows mixed with the faint hum of conversation. The young waitress was moving between tables, refilling glasses and wiping crumbs from the tablecloths. She passed by the grand piano again, and her eyes lingered on the keys. For a brief second, she felt the pull of the music so strongly that she almost reached out to touch it. She didn't, of course. Not yet. But the feeling stayed with her like a small spark waiting to catch fire. Even in her quiet life, she dreamed big. She dreamed of sharing her music, of letting people hear the stories her fingers could tell. She dreamed of sitting at the piano and making the room fall silent with the beauty of her playing. But she knew the time was not right, not yet. So she kept her dream locked away, hidden behind her soft smile and polite movements. That day, as she carried a tray of desserts to a table of important guests, she noticed how the piano seemed to call to her more than ever. It wasn't just a piece of furniture to her. It was a friend, a companion, a way to express the deepest parts of herself. She imagined herself sitting there, playing a melody that made everyone in the room stop and listen. She imagined the surprise on the faces of those who never noticed her before. The thought made her heart race, but she pushed it aside and focused on her work. As the evening approached, the restaurant began to fill with more guests. The lights reflected off the polished surfaces, the glasses tinkled softly, and the air smelled of rich food and delicate flowers. The young waitress continued her rounds, quiet and careful, unnoticed by most. Yet inside her the music stirred, ready to be awakened. The grand piano waited in the corner, silent and patient, as if it knew that one day she would sit down and let her talent shine. Little did she know, that day was closer than she thought. Something was about to happen that would change everything, a moment when her hidden genius would no longer be a secret. But for now, she remained the quiet waitress, polite and unnoticed, moving gracefully through the elegant restaurant, dreaming of a music only she could hear. And so, the stage was set. A quiet young woman, a grand piano, and a restaurant filled with people who would soon realize that sometimes the most extraordinary things are hidden in the most ordinary places. Her story, the story of her secret talent, was waiting for the perfect moment to unfold. And when that moment came, it would be unforgettable. The day had been busy, but the evening was supposed to be even bigger. The restaurant had been booked for an important event, a gathering of people who mattered in the city, including business leaders, critics, and socialites. The manager had spent weeks planning every detail, making sure the staff knew their roles and that everything would run perfectly. The tables were set with extra care, the silverware polished until it gleamed, and the flowers arranged to look like tiny works of art. The air smelled rich with expensive food, and the soft hum of quiet music usually played in the background. Tonight, however, the piano was meant to be the centerpiece. Adding elegance and sophistication to the evening, the young waitress had been running around, making sure every table was perfect. She refilled water glasses, cleared plates, and offered polite smiles to each guest. Everything seemed normal at first. She moved with her usual calm, almost invisible efficiency, carefully balancing trays and keeping an eye on every table. She didn't think much of the piano tonight. It was just sitting there in the corner as usual. She had no reason to imagine that it would soon become the most important thing in her life, but then disaster struck. The pianist who had been hired to play that evening was running late. The manager's phone kept ringing, and each call brought worse news. The pianist was stuck in traffic, caught in a jam that showed no signs of clearing soon. The manager's face turned pale as he tried to think of a solution. He had promised the guests an evening filled with music, and now that promise seemed impossible to keep. Staff members began whispering nervously. "What do we do?" someone asked, glancing at the piano. Another muttered, "Maybe we can skip it?" Just play recorded music? But the manager shook his head. Recorded music would feel cold, lifeless, and the guests would notice. Tonight needed a live pianist, someone who could create the atmosphere that had been promised. Some of the other waitstaff started joking quietly. "Hey, maybe our quiet little waitress can play," one said with a laugh. "She looks like she's always dreaming about something." A few others chuckled, thinking it was funny to imagine the shy, polite girl sitting at the piano in front of all these important guests. They didn't take her seriously at all. They had never seen her play, and in their minds, she was just the quiet girl who delivered plates and refilled glasses. The young waitress overheard the whispers but did not react. She continued her work, moving from table to table with her calm efficiency. Her hands were steady, her smile polite, but inside her heart a mix of fear and curiosity stirred. Could they really be suggesting that she play? She had never performed in front of anyone outside her small private practice at home. And yet, she felt a strange pull toward the piano, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment all along. The older chef, who had been quietly watching from the kitchen, stepped forward. He could see the hesitation in the manager's eyes and the teasing expressions on the other staff. But he also saw the spark in the young waitress, the quiet confidence that no one else noticed. "Let her try," he said softly, but firmly. "She knows the piano. Trust me." The manager hesitated. He wasn't sure if this was a good idea. It was risky. What if she couldn't play well? What if the guests laughed or left disappointed? But as he looked at her, calm, composed, yet with a faint glimmer of nervous excitement, he realized that this might be their only chance. The pianist wasn't coming, and the evening couldn't go on without music. "All right," he said finally. "Let her try." The whispers around the room grew louder as the other staff exchanged looks of disbelief. "Did he really just say that?" someone asked. Another added, "She can't possibly play in front of all these people." But no one spoke to the young waitress directly. She was already moving toward the piano, her heart beating fast. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the eyes of the entire restaurant were on her. And, in a way, they were. When she reached the piano, she took a deep breath. She ran her fingers lightly over the smooth, shiny keys, feeling the familiar texture under her fingertips. She hadn't touched a piano this nice before. It was different from the old, slightly worn piano she had at home. But she felt a strange comfort. The keys felt like an old friend, ready to respond to every thought and emotion she wanted to express. The room had grown quiet. The guests were talking among themselves, unaware of what was about to happen, but the staff and manager were watching closely. Some of them still doubted, shaking their heads or exchanging uneasy glances. The young waitress noticed their expressions but didn't let them distract her. She focused on the piano, feeling the music within her. Ready to flow out? For a few moments, she simply sat there, letting the silence fill the space. She could hear the soft clinking of glasses, the distant hum of conversation, and the occasional shuffle of a chair. It all faded into the background as she centered herself, preparing to let her hidden talent finally show. Then, almost instinctively, her fingers moved. The first notes were soft, tentative, like a whisper. The melody started slowly, gentle and delicate, weaving through the room. The sound was so unexpected and beautiful that it made some of the staff freeze. Even the guests who were talking started to notice. Conversations began to quiet down, and heads slowly turned toward the piano. At first, no one could believe what they were hearing. The young waitress's playing was not just correct. It was filled with emotion, precision, and depth. The notes seemed to tell a story, one that touched the hearts of everyone in the room. The music was soft yet powerful, subtle yet unforgettable. Those who had underestimated her felt a sudden, intense realization. She was not just a quiet waitress. She was something far more extraordinary. The manager watched in awe. He had expected someone who might stumble, someone who could play a few notes at best. But this was something else entirely. The music filled the entire restaurant, changing the atmosphere. The elegant room, already beautiful, seemed to shine even brighter as the melody flowed through it. Guests who had been focused on their dinners now sat up straighter, listening, enchanted by the unexpected performance. Even the staff who had teased her felt a mix of shock and admiration. Their laughter from a few minutes ago seemed distant and foolish now. They watched, mouths slightly open, as the young waitress played with a confidence and skill that no one had imagined. She was no longer invisible. She had captured everyone's attention without a single word. The older chef smiled quietly from the kitchen doorway. He had known she had talent, but even he was amazed. The way she moved her hands, the way she expressed emotion through the piano, it was as if she had been born to do this. He felt proud, not just because of her skill, but because she had the courage to let it be seen at last. The music continued to flow. The young waitress became completely immersed in it, forgetting everything else, the nervousness, the teasing, the doubts. She was in her own world, a world created by the piano and the melody she had been holding inside for so long. The guests felt it too, the beauty and emotion of something real and profound. Their attention was fully captured, and the restaurant, usually filled with polite chatter, had become completely silent. For the first time, she realized what it felt like to share her talent, to let others experience the music she had always kept hidden. She felt nervous, yes, but also exhilarated. Each note, each chord was a message from her heart to everyone listening. The piano was no longer just an object in the corner of the room. It was a bridge between her inner world and the people around her. As she played, the young waitress noticed subtle changes. The guests leaned closer, some closing their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The manager and staff watched in amazement, realizing that what had seemed like a simple solution to a problem had turned into a moment of true magic. This night, which could have been a disaster, was becoming unforgettable. She finished the first piece, letting the final notes linger in the air. For a moment, no one moved. The room was still, filled with the echo of the piano and the stunned silence of everyone present. Then slowly, a few people began to clap. The clapping grew louder, spreading like a wave throughout the restaurant. Guests who had arrived expecting only dinner were now witnessing something extraordinary. The young waitress sat back, breathing heavily but smiling softly. She had done it. She had faced the unexpected challenge, and in that moment she had shared a part of herself that no one had ever known. The piano, the music, and the audience had combined to create something she would never forget. What had started as a chaotic night, with a missing pianist and anxious staff, had become a night of revelation. The quiet, simple waitress had stepped into the spotlight. Not by choice, but by circumstance, and in doing so, she had shown everyone her hidden genius. And in that moment, as the restaurant echoed with applause and amazement, she realized that her life was about to change. The piano was no longer a secret, and neither was she. The young waitress had never felt anything like this before. She had always played the piano in the quiet of her own home, where no one would judge her, where mistakes would disappear without notice. But now, sitting at the grand piano in the elegant restaurant, with dozens of people watching her, she felt a mixture of fear, excitement, and determination. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, as if feeling the energy of the room through the smooth black and white surfaces. She took a deep breath, letting it steady her. Then she began. The first note floated into the air, soft and delicate, like the first drop of rain on a quiet morning. It was small, almost hesitant, but it caught the attention of everyone in the restaurant. Guests who had been talking quietly stopped mid-sentence. The murmurs of the staff faded. Even the clinking of glasses seemed to pause, as though the entire room was holding its breath. The music had a gentle power, a pull that made people turn their heads toward her. As her fingers moved across the keys, the melody grew richer, more confident. She did not play by following a strict pattern or sheet music. She played from her heart. Each note seemed to carry a story, a feeling, a memory. The sound filled the room, wrapping around every corner and brushing against every listener. It was not just music. It was emotion made audible, a language that everyone could understand. Even without knowing why it touched them so deeply, people began to notice things they hadn't expected. The businessman at the corner table, usually stern and busy with his phone, closed his eyes and leaned slightly forward. He could feel the rhythm, the subtle rise and fall of the melody, and it made him pause in a way nothing else had that day. A young couple on the other side of the room held hands without speaking, their faces softening as the music washed over them. Even the children, who were usually restless and distracted during dinner, became quiet, mesmerized by the sound. The young waitress felt the room change around her. What had started as nervous tension transformed into something beautiful. The staff, who had doubted her just minutes ago, now watched in awe. The manager's jaw was slightly open, his eyes wide with disbelief and pride. He had never imagined that someone so quiet, so overlooked, could hold an entire room in their hands with nothing but a melody. Her hands moved more freely now, flowing over the keys as if they had been born to do this. Each chord, each arpeggio, built on the one before, creating a story that no one in the room wanted to end. She was no longer thinking about the guests or the staff. She was lost in the music, and in that loss she found freedom. The years of secret practice, of small hours spent alone at a tiny piano in her room, were coming to life all at once. One of the waiters, who had always been loud and teasing, stood frozen near the counter. He had joked about her many times, saying she was too shy to matter. But now, as he watched her hands dance across the keys, he felt a mix of shock and admiration. He realized that he had completely underestimated her. This quiet, polite girl had a gift that went beyond what anyone had imagined. The music was not just technically perfect. It was alive. It seemed to breathe with the emotions she had carried for years, emotions that had never found an outlet until now. Each note, each pause, each gentle swell of the melody pulled the listeners into her world. It was intimate yet grand, personal yet universal. People felt like they were part of something rare, a fleeting moment of beauty that they would remember forever. The guests who had arrived expecting a normal dinner suddenly found themselves in the middle of a private concert. Their attention was captured not by decorations, food, or even the service, but by the unexpected talent of someone they had never noticed before. The young waitress had transformed the restaurant into a concert hall, and she had done it effortlessly, without pretense or showiness. Her humility made the performance even more powerful. Even the pianist, who had been scheduled for the evening, though stuck in traffic miles away, would never have created this kind of impact. What she offered was not just skill, but soul. It was a story that had been waiting for the right moment and the right person to share it. And tonight, that moment had arrived. The older chef, standing quietly near the doorway to the kitchen, felt a lump in his throat. He had suspected for a long time that she was talented, but even he was overwhelmed by what he was hearing now. He had watched her carry trays and take orders, always polite, always gentle, never asking for recognition. And now she was giving everyone something unforgettable, a piece of herself, expressed through music. The waitress felt the audience leaning in without needing to see them. She could sense their attention, their awe, their quiet amazement. The soft notes that began the piece had grown into a complex, emotional arrangement that filled the room completely. It was as if the restaurant itself had been transformed into something alive, breathing with every chord and melody. The grand chandeliers seemed to shine brighter, the polished tables reflected more light, and the very air seemed to vibrate with music. She didn't look up. Her eyes were focused on the keys, but she felt every reaction. The guests were silent now, some even holding their breath, caught in the spell of the music. A critic at one of the tables leaned slightly forward, his hand covering his mouth, trying to contain his surprise. He had expected a normal dinner with polite music, not this revelation. He was witnessing a talent that could not be ignored. Her performance continued to grow, becoming more daring, more expressive. She played with confidence and control, letting each note flow naturally, letting her feelings dictate the rhythm and pace. The music told a story of quiet strength, hidden talent, and the beauty that often goes unnoticed in the simplest places. She was telling the audience about herself, about the years she had spent practicing alone, about the dreams she had quietly nurtured, about the moments when she had almost given up but had continued anyway. The applause began slowly. A few hesitant claps that spread through the restaurant. But soon it grew louder, filling the room with warmth and admiration. The guests were not clapping just because she had finished a piece. They were clapping because they had been touched, moved, and amazed by the raw talent and emotion she had shared. The young waitress allowed herself a small smile, still focused on the piano, letting the music linger in the air a moment longer before the final note. Her hands rested lightly on the keys. The room was silent for a heartbeat, everyone savoring the last vibrations of the music. Then a wave of applause washed over her, stronger and more heartfelt than anything she had expected. The staff clapped, some cheering quietly, still amazed. The manager came closer, his eyes shining with pride, knowing that this night, which could have been a disaster, had become unforgettable because of her courage and talent. The young waitress finally looked up, her cheeks slightly flushed but her smile genuine. She realized that she had not only played music, she had shared a part of herself, something precious that she had hidden for so long. The guests were no longer just diners. They were witnesses to a story that could only be told through the piano. They had seen the quiet, simple girl become extraordinary, and they would remember it for a long time. Even the staff members who had doubted her, who had whispered behind her back, now looked at her with awe and respect. The quiet waitress who had been overlooked had captured everyone's attention, not with words or force, but with her talent, her dedication, and the courage to let her heart speak through the piano. The manager approached her cautiously, unsure whether to speak or simply let the moment continue. He finally said softly, That was incredible. I had no idea." His voice was full of wonder and respect. The young waitress nodded politely, her smile soft, feeling a mix of pride and relief. She had done it. She had faced her fear, stepped into the spotlight, and transformed the room with her music. The older chef, still standing near the doorway, shook his head in disbelief. He had known she had talent, but even he could not have predicted the impact of this performance. He felt proud in a way that was difficult to describe, proud of her skill, her courage, and the beauty she had created. He quietly hoped that this moment would be just the beginning of a life where her talent could shine freely. The young waitress looked around the room once more. The guests were smiling, some wiping tears from their eyes, all captivated. The staff had stopped whispering, replaced by expressions of admiration and surprise. Even the restaurant itself seemed to have changed, as if it had been waiting for this moment to finally come alive. And in that moment, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The piano was no longer just a secret friend in the corner of the restaurant. It was a bridge, a voice, and a key to a new chapter in her life. The quiet, polite waitress had become someone unforgettable, someone whose music could touch hearts and minds in ways that words could never achieve. The moment had arrived when the quiet waitress realized she had completely captured the room. The music she was playing was no longer just a performance. It had become an experience. Each note, each chord seemed to float in the air, wrapping around every guest and staff member like a warm, invisible embrace. The elegant restaurant, which usually buzzed with polite chatter and clinking glasses, was now completely still, as if holding its breath. She continued to play, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the keys. There was a confidence in her movements now, a sense of freedom that came from letting herself feel the music fully. She had started tentatively, unsure if she could perform in front of all these people, but now she was lost in the melody. The music poured out of her as naturally as breathing, each note telling a story, each pause carrying meaning. The guests were mesmerized. People who had arrived with casual conversation or business concerns were now fully attentive, leaning forward slightly in their chairs, their eyes fixed on the young waitress. Even the children, who usually squirmed and whispered, sat still, captivated by the sound. Some of the guests closed their eyes, letting the music fill their hearts, while others exchanged glances of awe with the people sitting across from them. It was a shared moment of wonder, a rare experience that brought everyone together without a single word. The staff, who had been skeptical just moments ago, were now completely silent, their earlier whispers and jokes forgotten. The manager, standing near the piano, could hardly believe what was happening. He had expected someone timid and inexperienced, but instead, he watched a young woman create a spellbinding performance that seemed far beyond her years. His heart swelled with pride and admiration. He realized that this night, which had begun with worry and panic, was now turning into something magical because of her. The older chef, who had quietly observed the entire time, felt a lump rise in his throat. He had always suspected that she had talent, but even he had not imagined its full depth. Watching her play now, he could see the years of dedication, the countless hours spent practicing in secret, the courage it took to finally share her gift. He felt proud, not only of her skill, but of her bravery. She had faced a challenge head-on, and in doing so, she had transformed the entire atmosphere of the restaurant. Some guests reached for their phones, but not to talk or text. They wanted to record the moment. They understood that what they were witnessing was rare and special, a performance that could not easily be repeated. Even without capturing it on video, they knew the memory would stay with them forever. There was a sense of excitement in the room, but it was quiet and respectful, unlike the noisy thrill of a party. It was a deep human reaction to witnessing something beautiful and unexpected. As she played, the young waitress felt a mixture of emotions herself. There was nervousness, yes, but also exhilaration. Each note she struck was a message to the world, a revelation of the talent she had hidden for so long. She felt a connection to everyone listening, even though they didn't know her story yet. The music was her voice, her way of communicating the depth of her emotions without saying a single word. The melody grew more intricate, weaving together gentle harmonies with stronger, more dramatic chords. She allowed herself to take risks, to explore the full range of the piano. The audience responded instinctively, drawn deeper into her world. The restaurant, with its polished floors and glittering chandeliers, felt like it had become a stage for something greater than itself. Every guest, from the quietest diner to the loudest staff member, was part of this shared experience. Some of the guests began to whisper softly among themselves, not in criticism but in wonder. "Who knew she could play like this?" one said. "It's incredible," another added, eyes wide in amazement. Their words were full of admiration and surprise, and they reflected what everyone in the room was feeling. People who had underestimated her, who had ignored her for months, were now witnessing something unforgettable. The waitress didn't notice their whispers. She was fully immersed in the music. Her focus was on the piano and the emotions she wanted to share. She felt a sense of liberation as she played, a feeling she had never experienced before. The quiet hours spent practicing alone had prepared her for this moment. And now she was giving the world a glimpse of the talent that had always been there, waiting for the right opportunity. As she moved from one piece to another, the music seemed to transform the room. The air felt lighter, almost electric with emotion. Guests who had arrived stressed or distracted were now smiling, some with tears in their eyes, touched by the sincerity of her playing. The staff, too, had changed. Their skepticism had been replaced by respect, their casual indifference now transformed into admiration. The restaurant had become a place where everyone was united by a single, powerful experience, the music of a quiet, humble waitress. The manager realized that this performance could not have been predicted or planned. No professional pianist could have matched the authenticity and depth of emotion that she brought to each note. It was not just technical skill. It was the way she expressed herself, the honesty in her playing, and the courage it took to share her hidden talent with strangers. The entire evening had been transformed by her presence, and her music, even the guests who were usually critical or difficult, seemed to be affected. Their usual air of judgment and expectation had softened, replaced by genuine appreciation. They leaned back in their chairs, letting the music wash over them, feeling the layers of emotion in each chord. Some closed their eyes, others held their breath, but all were captivated. The restaurant, usually filled with polite chatter and the clinking of glasses, was now a silent sanctuary of music and emotion. As the young waitress continued, she began to notice subtle signs of recognition and admiration from the guests. A music teacher at one of the tables, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward with growing excitement, clearly impressed by the complexity and beauty of her performance. Another guest, a writer, took notes quietly, perhaps thinking about how this moment could inspire something meaningful. Every person in the room seemed to feel that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The young waitress did not stop to think about the attention she was receiving. Her mind was entirely focused on the music. She played with heart and soul, allowing the melody to guide her, letting her emotions flow through her fingers. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a vessel for her expression, a way to communicate her story without words. Each note carried a piece of herself, a secret she had kept for years, now shared openly with everyone in the room. As the performance reached its peak, the atmosphere in the restaurant changed even further. The guests were completely absorbed, hanging on every note, moved by the unexpected brilliance of her talent. The staff, once doubtful and teasing, now watched with wide eyes and open admiration. The manager, unable to contain his amazement, whispered to the chef, This is unbelievable. She's extraordinary." The chef nodded quietly, still smiling, knowing that he had witnessed a once-in-a-lifetime moment when the young waitress finally concluded the piece. There was a brief pause, a moment of stunned silence. The final notes hung in the air like delicate threads, and the audience seemed to take a collective breath, reluctant to break the spell. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room. At first, it was tentative, but it grew steadily, spreading from table to table. The clapping became louder, more heartfelt, until it filled the restaurant completely. The guests rose to their feet, some cheering softly, some wiping tears from their eyes, all united in their admiration. The staff, too, joined in, clapping and smiling, unable to hide their amazement. The manager stepped forward, still in awe, and the older chef quietly nodded in approval. The young waitress, slightly flushed but smiling gently, allowed herself a moment to feel pride and relief. She had done it. She had faced the challenge, shared her talent, and transformed the night. For the first time, she understood what it meant to truly share a gift with others. The music had been her secret for so long, but now it was no longer hidden. She had shown the world a part of herself that had always existed, and the response had been more beautiful than she could have imagined. She realized that sometimes the right moment could make all the difference. A single opportunity could reveal something extraordinary in the most ordinary person. The guests continued to talk quietly, still replaying the performance in their minds. They were no longer just diners. They had been part of an experience, a rare and unforgettable moment. Some approached her to offer congratulations, others simply smiled, their faces glowing with admiration. Even the staff who had doubted her earlier now looked at her with newfound respect. Recognizing that her talent went far beyond what they had imagined, the young waitress looked at the grand piano, her fingers lightly resting on the keys. She felt a deep sense of connection and gratitude. This night had changed everything. She had been invisible, overlooked, and underestimated, but she had stepped into the light and shown what she was capable of. The music had spoken for her when words could not, and she had touched the hearts of everyone in the room. As the evening continued, she realized that this was only the beginning. The piano had opened. The applause from the performance still echoed softly in the restaurant as the young waitress slowly stood from the piano bench. Her hands lingered for a moment over the keys, feeling the warmth of the wood and the subtle vibrations of the last note she had played. She had always imagined playing the piano in secret, alone in her room, but now she realized that the music she had kept hidden for so long had the power to touch everyone in the room. She felt a mixture of relief, pride, and a quiet joy that was hard to describe. Guests began approaching her one by one. Some offered words of praise, shaking their heads in disbelief at her talent. "I've never heard anything like that," one guest said softly, his eyes wide with admiration. Another added, "You have a gift." That was incredible. She nodded politely, smiling, but a small part of her felt shy. She wasn't used to so much attention, and even though the words made her heart swell, she found herself almost wanting to disappear. Yet she knew she had earned this recognition, and that gave her a quiet strength. The older chef, who had watched everything from the doorway, walked over and gave her a small, approving nod. He didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes spoke volumes. He had known for a long time that she had talent, but now he felt proud in a way he had never felt before. He had seen the years of quiet practice, the dedication, and the courage it took to finally share her gift. Now he realized the whole world could see what he had always known. She was extraordinary. The manager, still standing near the piano, approached her carefully. I don't even know how to say it, he said, shaking his head in amazement. It was more than music. You've changed the whole night and probably the way everyone here will remember it forever. She gave him a small smile, still a bit overwhelmed. The attention felt strange, but also exciting. She had always loved music, but she had never imagined that it could have such a powerful effect on people she had never met before, among the guests. There was a music teacher who had been quietly observing throughout the performance. He approached her cautiously, a look of admiration on his face. I've seen many talented musicians in my life, he said softly, but what you did tonight was something rare. You have a gift, and I would love to help you share it with the world if you are willing. The young waitress blinked in surprise. She had never considered taking her music beyond the quiet of her own home. But now, standing there in the restaurant, she realized that perhaps it was time. Other guests, too, began to take notice in a new way. Some asked the manager if she would be allowed to play again at future events. Others whispered among themselves about how remarkable it was to see someone so quiet, someone so unassuming, create such a profound impact. Even the staff, who had once teased her or overlooked her, now approached with smiles, congratulations, and sincere admiration. It was as if the entire restaurant had shifted its view of her, suddenly seeing the extraordinary talent that had been hidden behind the polite, quiet exterior. The young waitress felt a mixture of emotions. She had always been content with her life, simple and quiet as it was, but now she realized that her music had a power she had never fully understood. It wasn't just about playing the piano. It was about connecting with people, touching their hearts, and sharing a part of herself that words could not express. She had always dreamed of this moment in secret, but it was more than she had ever imagined. As the evening continued, the manager made a quiet announcement to the staff. He suggested that she play regularly at the restaurant, perhaps even becoming the featured musician for special events. The staff who had doubted her before nodded in agreement, some with expressions of regret for underestimating her, others simply in awe of her talent. The idea that this quiet waitress could become a celebrated musician within the restaurant seemed natural now, almost inevitable. The music teacher approached her again, offering guidance and mentorship. He spoke softly about opportunities to perform in public, to develop her skill further, and to let her music reach a wider audience. She listened carefully, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The thought of stepping into the world beyond the restaurant was daunting, but she also felt ready. For the first time, she realized that her music could take her places she had never dreamed of. Some guests lingered at the end of the evening, asking to speak to her again, to hear her thoughts about music, and to express their admiration. She answered politely, her smile gentle, but inside she felt a growing sense of confidence. She had faced a challenge, shared her gift, and seen how it could affect people deeply. That realization filled her with a quiet, steady courage. She knew that she would never be the same again. The staff began to talk among themselves, reflecting on the performance and its impact. Those who had once whispered jokes about her now expressed amazement and respect. Some admitted they had underestimated her, realizing that her quiet demeanor had concealed a remarkable talent. Others simply shook their heads, smiling at the surprise and joy of witnessing something so beautiful and unexpected. The entire restaurant had been transformed that night, and everyone present knew it. The young waitress looked around the room one last time, taking in the faces of the guests and staff. She felt a deep gratitude for the chance to share her talent, for the support of the chef who had believed in her, and for the manager who had taken a risk by letting her play. She understood that this night was a turning point, a moment when her life could change in ways she had never imagined. The piano had been her companion for years, but now it had become a bridge to the world. As the restaurant began to quiet down and guests left, she realized that her life was entering a new chapter. She had been unnoticed, quiet, and simple for so long, but now her talent had been recognized and celebrated. She had stepped into the spotlight not by choice, but because she had been ready when the opportunity appeared. And in doing so, she had shown everyone that greatness often comes from the most unexpected places. The manager approached her one final time that evening. "You have a gift that should not be hidden," he said. "If you want, I would like you to play here regularly. People would love to hear your music again." She nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. The thought of returning to the piano, of sharing her music again, no longer seemed frightening. It felt right. It felt like the beginning of something new. The older chef smiled at her quietly. He had always seen her potential, but now he felt proud in a way that went beyond words. He had witnessed her courage, her skill, and her ability to move an entire room with something she had always held close to her heart. He knew that this was just the beginning, that her talent would continue to grow and touch many more lives in the future. As she helped clear tables and finish the last tasks of the night, she reflected on what had just happened. She realized that her quiet life had been full of preparation for this very moment. The years of secret practice, the patience, the discipline, and even the loneliness had all contributed to the performance that had astonished everyone. She understood that her dedication and love for music had finally been recognized, and it was a feeling she would never forget. Some of the guests returned after leaving, asking her to play one more piece before they went home. She smiled politely and agreed, sitting at the piano once more. Her fingers touched the keys lightly at first, then she began to play, letting the melody flow naturally. The music was softer this time, more personal, almost like a conversation. The guests listened quietly, savoring the last moments of a night that had been unlike any other. By the end of the evening, it was clear that her life had changed. She had gone from being a quiet, overlooked waitress to someone whose talent had captured the hearts of an entire room. The recognition she received was not just for her skill, but for the courage it took to reveal something she had always kept hidden. She had shown that even the most unassuming people can have extraordinary gifts, and that sharing those gifts can change lives, not just for oneself, but for everyone who experiences them. As she finally left the restaurant for the night, the piano sitting silently in the corner, she felt a sense of hope and anticipation. She knew that this was only the beginning. Opportunities would come, and she was ready to face them. She had discovered that her talent could open doors she had never imagined, and that courage, combined with passion, could create moments that people would remember forever. The quiet waitress had become something more that night, a musician, an artist, and an inspiration. The elegant restaurant would always remember the night when it fell silent, when a hidden talent was revealed, and when a young woman's courage and skill had transformed everything. And she, walking home under the soft glow of streetlights, knew that her life would never be the same again. Her music had finally been heard. Her story had finally begun.